My mother looked at me across the table and said that all I had was this family and I needed to be honest with them. She said this after breaking a secret I specifically asked her to keep, reframing the breaking of it as love and turning a dinner into a group audit of my life choices. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "All right, since honesty is what we're doing, let's be honest. I need to tell you about the family before I tell you about the dinner. Because the dinner only makes sense as the conclusion of something very long, and if I drop you into a room with 11 people and start describing what I said to each of them without the context of who they are and what they've done, it will read as unhinged. I was not unhinged. I was specific. I want you to understand the difference. My name is Liam. I'm 29 years old. I'm a junior solicitor at a small firm, civil law, some estate work, which becomes relevant later in a way I did not expect and have not fully processed. I moved out of my parents' house at 18 and have been managing my own life since, with varying degrees of success, in the specific way of someone who was never given the infrastructure for it, but built it anyway through trial and significant error. The family dinner was at my sister Janet's house for her 3rd wedding anniversary. The occasion was pleasant in its stated intention and toxic in its execution, which is the operating condition of every family gathering I have attended for the past 2 decades. Let me tell you who was in the room. My father, Brian, 61 years old, retired salaryman, or rather, a man who describes himself as retired but whose retirement was the result of a series of financial decisions that had the texture of entropy rather than planning. My father is the kind of man who will spend 40,000 rupees helping a neighbor fix a car while telling his own children there's no money for school trips. He is the kind of man who will research the best insurance policies for his colleagues' families while having none for his own. He is the kind of man who, when things go wrong financially, demonstrates a sudden onset of comprehensive incompetence, does not understand the forms, does not know where the documents are, cannot recall the account numbers, becomes confused by questions he has answered for strangers without hesitation. He lives beyond his means. He has always lived beyond his means. The means, when they run short, become the family's problem rather than his. My mother, Candace, 58, the keeper of the peace and the inventory of sacrifices simultaneously. My mother will absorb anything rather than disturb the surface. She will agree with 2 contradictory positions in the same hour to keep both people happy and see no contradiction in this because the preservation of peace is the goal, and the goal justifies the method. She will also, at some point in every gathering, find a way to establish what she has given up, what she has endured, what she has managed that nobody else could have managed. Not once. As a continuous ambient presence, the sacrifice is always available for reference. She keeps secrets that are not hers to keep. She also does not keep secrets that are. My sister Janet, 32. Janet is not a villain in the story. She is a person who has decided with great clarity and consistency that her primary responsibility is to Janet. This is not always wrong. Some degree of self-preservation is healthy. What Janet's version of it looks like in practice is, she secures what she needs before anyone else's need becomes visible. She does this smoothly, without drama, with the specific skill of someone who has practiced it for 30 years. The anniversary party was her event and her domain, and she controlled the energy of it in the way she controls everything, which is, efficiently and in her favor. My brother-in-law, Arnold, 36. Arnold has a government job. He has had this government job for 8 years. He treats this government job as the primary credential of a man who has achieved something singular and unprecedented in human history. Every conversation eventually roots back to the government job. Every opinion is underwritten by the authority of the government job. Every dinner suggestion is made by a man who has a government job and therefore understands things at a level that the privately employed do not. I have nothing specific against Arnold, except that he is a man who has confused security with superiority and applies the confusion broadly. My elder uncle, Stefan, 55. Stefan has not been employed in 11 years. He is what my family charitably calls a homemaker and what my mother, in private conversations she believes are private, calls something considerably less charitable. He manages the house. His wife Catherine works. This arrangement is not my business, and I hold no judgment of it in principle. What I do hold judgment of is the specific quality of a man who is entirely funded by his wife's income and has developed, over 11 years of not working, comprehensive opinions about employment, business, economics, child-rearing, government policy, and the state of the market, which he dispenses at family gatherings with the authority of a man who has navigated all of these things personally rather than observed them from a funded distance. My Aunt Catherine, 52. Catherine works for the government. She has worked for the government for 9 years. Before the government job, she worked intermittently in various administrative positions of no particular significance. The government job came about through a chain of circumstances that, in any honest accounting, included considerable luck, a position that opened at a specific moment, a connection she happened to have, a recruitment process that ran differently than expected. Catherine has since rewritten this history into a narrative of earned expertise, strategic planning, and deserve-based selection that bears no relation to how my mother described it at the time, which I know because I was 15 when it happened, and I was present for the description. Catherine treats her government employment as Arnold treats his, as a credential that elevates her perspective above those of the ungoverned. My cousin, Rick, 27. 3 years ago, Rick was in a rehabilitation facility for 18 months following a substance-dependent situation that the family discussed in the specific hushed tones of something shameful that must be managed rather than addressed. He emerged from rehabilitation, as far as anyone could observe, improved. He then secured employment abroad, the nature of which has been described variously as tech consulting, software development, and project management depending on who you ask and when. Nobody has seen his office. Nobody has met his colleagues. Nobody has visited the place he works or can describe its location with specific accuracy. Rick's LinkedIn profile has existed for 2 years and contains no endorsements, no connections from the company he names, and a job title that produces no search results when combined with the company name. Rick, however, has extensive opinions about the job market, about what young people should be doing, about the importance of upskilling, about what opportunities are available to those who look in the right places. He dispenses these opinions from the authority of someone who has, apparently, secured one of those opportunities. My younger uncle, Dan, 68. Dan is the most physically present and the most transparently functional member of the extended family. He works as a security guard despite being 68 years old. He does this because his wife, Pam, 65, does not work and spends her days on social outings, temple visits, and whatever occupies a woman who has decided that the division of labor in her marriage runs in one direction. Dan also manages the household. He cooks, he cleans, he manages the groceries. When I was younger, he was the family member I saw most frequently. He visited my parents regularly, ate at our table, was present for every occasion. And then for 5 years he wasn't. He disappeared from our lives with no explanation. No call, no message, no response to contact. My parents made efforts and received silence. The 5 years of absence coincided. I found this out much later from my father in one of his rare moments of honesty with a private loan that Dan had taken in my father's name, a significant amount. During COVID, my father repaid it. He did not tell anyone why he was struggling more than the obvious reasons. He absorbed it. Because that is what my father does for everyone, except his immediate family. Dan reappeared 6 months ago. He came to my parents' door on a Sunday with Pam and their son, a man in his 30s whose name I will not include, and behaved as though the 5 years had been a minor gap in an otherwise continuous relationship. My family opened the door. My family fed them. My family welcomed them as though nothing had happened. I sat in the living room and watched this, and I filed it next to everything else I had been filing. Relative Harry, 50-something. Harry is the kind of family member who exists at a slight distance, close enough to be invited to significant events, distant enough that his behavior is not directly monitored. He is married. He travels frequently for work. He travels, I was told by my cousin Daisy in a conversation she prefaced with "You didn't hear this from me," with a young woman who is his personal secretary, and whose relationship to him is described professionally in a way that Daisy, and apparently several people within the relevant distance of information, do not fully believe. Daisy told me this in confidence. Daisy also told me something else, that Harry had told my mother, in what he assumed was an equivalent confidence, that he had concerns about Op's mental stability based on things my mother had apparently shared with him, and that my mother had received this information and engaged with it rather than defending me. I had both sides of two separate conversations from two separate people, who each believed they were talking to someone who would keep it contained. Neither side was contained. Now the grandparents. I need to tell you about this carefully, because it involves legal information and estate documentation, and the specific ethics of a junior solicitor who comes across something in the course of their work that has personal significance and has to decide what to do with it. My maternal grandfather, Martin, who died 4 years ago, was a man I knew as a stern but fundamentally decent patriarch, reserved, principled in the way he presented himself. He died leaving behind a modest estate that was distributed among his children in a manner that was described to the family as equitable. 8 months ago, I was working on an estate case at my firm, entirely unrelated to my family, and I encountered a set of documents through a title search that flagged a property. The property flagged was connected to a surname I recognized. I investigated further through the appropriate legal channels, with my supervising partner's knowledge, because the coincidence needed to be properly handled. What I found was this: my grandfather had a second family, not a brief affair, a sustained parallel arrangement spanning over 20 years, with one woman and 2 children. The second family was known to nobody in my family as far as I can establish. The estate, which my family believed had been distributed equitably, had not been distributed equitably. A significant portion, I am not going to name the exact figure because it is the subject of potential future legal proceedings, had been directed to the second family through an arrangement that predated my grandfather's death by several years and was documented in a way that was technically legal and comprehensively hidden. I had been carrying this for 8 months. I had not told anyone. I had been deciding what to do with it, whether to tell my mother, whether to initiate a legal challenge, whether to simply hold it and let it be what it was, a thing I knew that would cause enormous damage to a family that had already accumulated plenty of damage and might not benefit from more. I had been protecting them, in other words, with information that was mine to disclose. I had chosen not to. Until the dinner. I want to describe the dinner up to the moment things changed, because the context matters. The food was good. Janet is a good host when she decides to be. The table was set well. The early conversation was the standard family gathering rotation. How is work? How is the city? The price of everything these days. Someone's child who had achieved something. Someone else's child who had not. I had been laid off 6 weeks prior. Not catastrophically. The company had restructured. The role had been eliminated. I was one of 8 people across the team. I had severance. I had savings. I had an idea I had been developing quietly for 3 months, a small legal services venture targeting a gap I had identified in my city's civil law market, and I had been researching it and drafting plans and cautiously beginning to believe it might be viable. I had told my mother about it, not the family. My mother specifically, because she was the one who called most often, and because I wanted to think out loud with someone, and because, and this is the part that costs me most to look at directly, I still, at 29, still believed that my mother was someone I could trust with something I wasn't ready to have examined by everyone. I told her to keep it between us. She said she would. I was specific about the reason. Family gatherings have a way of turning my plans into a group project of criticism, and I was not in the emotional position to absorb that right now. She said she understood. The conversation at the dinner turned to me. Someone, I think it was Arnold, asked how work was going. I gave a vague answer that was technically true, exploring some options, taking a bit of time. This is the language of someone who has been laid off and is not ready to discuss it publicly, which is a sentence any reasonable person would understand. My mother interrupted. She said, "Actually, Liam has been laid off and is thinking of starting his own practice." And then she looked at me with an expression that was performing warmth and said, "I think he should be honest with the family. We're all here for him." She then told the table why I had asked her not to say anything. She said he was worried you'd all criticize him, which I think shows that he doesn't trust his own family. And the table rotated. Stefan said he should think carefully because business is very difficult. He had statistics. Rick said that in the current market, employment stability was very important. He had experience. Arnold said that the government sector had certain protections. He had an example. Catherine said that she had seen many people try and fail, and this was something to consider seriously. Harry said that Liam had always been a little scattered, which he said with the tone of someone offering a balanced assessment. My mother, throughout this, was nodding with the expression of someone who has done a good thing. My father said nothing. My sister watched with the neutral attention of someone who is deciding what to do with the information in the room. I sat at the table and I let the rotation complete. I waited until there was a natural pause. Then I looked at my mother. I said, "You're right. Honesty is all I have. Let me try that." The table went quiet in the way. A table goes quiet when the register of a room changes. I said, "I'm going to go around the table. I have something for everyone here. I'm going to ask everyone to extend me the same honesty they've been extending each other when I'm not in the room." Agreed. Nobody said agreed. Nobody said anything. I started. I said, "Stefan, uncle, I want to thank you for the business advice. It's generous coming from a man who hasn't been employed in 11 years and is funded entirely by his wife's salary. The opinions on business and economics are especially interesting from that position. Also, and this is from Mom, not from me, because I heard this conversation from the kitchen when I was visiting 2 years ago. Mom has told 3 separate people in this family that you are an embarrassment to your father's name and that your wife carries you like a child. I thought you should know she says that. She says it with consistency." Stefan started to speak. I moved on. I said, "Catherine, Aunt, congratulations again on the government job. I remember when you got it. I was 15. Mom described it to her friend on the phone as a miracle that fell into her lap because Raj and Uncle knew someone in the department and the recruitment that year was a mess. She said you weren't the strongest candidate, but the strongest candidate withdrew. That was her description 9 years ago. The expertise since then has been impressive." Catherine said my name. I moved on. I said, "Rick, I've been meaning to ask you something. And I mean this as a genuine question, not a criticism. Could you send me your company's LinkedIn page or the address? I've tried to find it and I haven't been able to. I'm asking because you've given me a lot of useful perspective on the job market this evening, and I want to share some of your resources with colleagues. It would help to have something to point them toward." Rick said the company had a limited online presence. I said I thought it might. 3 years ago you were in rehabilitation. I'm glad you're doing well. I mean that sincerely and without reservation. I am less sincere about the job market expertise. I moved on. I said, Arnold, 8 years. You've had the government job for 8 years. That's a real achievement, and I mean that. The position is secure, the benefits are good, you've provided well for Janet, and I respect that. What I'd ask is whether you think it's possible, genuinely possible, that there are people in this room for whom your job is not the relevant benchmark for their decisions. Because I have been attending family events for 29 years, and I have not attended a single one where your employment status was not eventually introduced as evidence in an argument you weren't having. I'd like to understand what argument you think you're winning. Arnold looked at Janet. Janet looked at the table. I moved on. I said, Dan, uncle, welcome back. 5 years is a long time. I'm glad to see you're well. I'm also glad that your visit didn't coincide with any particular financial need this time, as far as I know. Dad told me about the loan. He didn't want to. I asked him directly when he was struggling during COVID, and eventually he was honest with me, which is something I'm apparently the only one in this family who can appreciate. You took a private loan in his name during a pandemic. You disappeared for 5 years. You came back 6 months ago with Pam, Auntie, and Dino, and you sat in that living room eating his food and nobody said anything. I said nothing too. I've been thinking about that. I shouldn't have said nothing. Dan started to speak. My father put a hand up. I did not look at my father. I moved on. I said, Harry, Daisy told me about it now. I'm not going to say more than that because it's your marriage and not my business. What is my business is this. You told my mother that you had concerns about my mental stability based on things she had shared with you. And you shared this as a concern, as something to consider, and she received it and engaged with it rather than telling you that her son's mental health was not a topic for third-party discussion. Daisy also told me that you told Mrs. Sharma at the Desai function that Mom had been difficult to deal with during the Nandini situation and that you weren't sure she was handling things well. So you told Mom things about me. You told Mrs. Sharma things about Mom. I want to know which version of your mouth is the one that's in the room tonight, because I would like to speak to that one directly. Harry said he didn't know what I was talking about. I said that's fine, Daisy knows, and Daisy has a good memory. I moved on. I said, Dad, I'm not going to say very much to you. I'm going to say one thing. You helped 17 people in this room at various points. You helped neighbors. You helped colleagues. You helped extended family. You helped people you barely knew. You helped Dan, uncle, and didn't tell anyone and absorbed the cost during the worst year any of us has had. And when things go wrong for this family, you become someone who doesn't understand forms and doesn't know where documents are and can't remember account numbers. I know why you do that. I think you do it because carrying everyone's problems is easier for you than asking for help carrying your own. I think that's a very lonely way to live. I don't have more to say about it tonight. My father looked at the table. I turned to my mother. I said, Mom, I asked you to keep something private. I gave you a specific reason. You broke the confidence, disclosed the reason I gave, and then positioned the breaking as care. In this family, that is not unusual. What was unusual was that it was me. I usually do the carrying. I carry other people's business, other people's secrets, other people's versions of events that aren't mine to hold. I have been doing this for 26 years. She started to say something. I said, I'm not finished. I said, I have been carrying something for 8 months that I want to put down now. 8 months ago, I came across some documents in the course of my work. Estate documents. They concerned Martin. The table had been quiet before. It went quieter. I said, Martin had a second family. A woman, I will not name her, and 2 children. The relationship ran for more than 20 years. I verified this through legal channels. The estate, when it was settled, was not distributed equitably. A portion that was described to this family as accounted for was directed to the second family. I have the documentation. I have been sitting on it for 8 months deciding whether to tell anyone. I looked at my mother. I said, I didn't tell anyone because I was protecting you, because I knew what this would do to you and I wasn't sure you could carry it. Because even after everything, I still do that. I still make calculations about what this family can absorb, and I absorb the rest on your behalf. I said I should not have been making those calculations. Nobody asked me to. Nobody thanked me for it. Nobody has ever acknowledged that I do it. I said, I'm telling you now because you just told the table that honesty is all I have. And you're right. This is all I have left. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. I said to the room generally, the estate documentation will be shared with a family solicitor in the coming weeks. I would recommend you consult one independently before that happens. I said good night. I left. The table did not stay silent for long. I could hear it starting as I walked down the hallway. I could hear it escalating as I closed the front door. I sat in my car in my sister's driveway for about 4 minutes. Then I drove home. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I had not expected relief exactly, but I had expected something in that direction. What I felt instead was a very specific exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who has been holding a very large weight and has finally put it down, and is now experiencing what their arms feel like without it. The absence of the weight. The strange lightness of having nothing left to protect. My phone started ringing before I reached the end of the road. I turned it face down on the passenger seat. I drove home. Update. It's been 6 weeks since the dinner. I want to give you the practical inventory first, because the practical inventory is important context for everything else. I am in my apartment. My phone number is the same, but the incoming calls from certain numbers are routed directly to voicemail, which I check approximately once every 3 days for anything that requires a legal or administrative response. There has been one such thing, a letter from a family solicitor representing my mother's side regarding the estate matter, which my own supervising partner is handling. Everything else is noise, and I have made my peace with the noise. I am employed. The venture I mentioned at the dinner, the one my mother disclosed, the one that became the occasion for the group audit of my life choices, I have continued building it. I have 2 clients as of this week. They are modest. They are real. They exist because I built them, not because I was given them, which is a category of thing I have some experience with at this point. I am by most metrics fine. The route to fine was not smooth, and I want to tell you about it accurately. That night, my phone received 47 calls between leaving the driveway and going to sleep. I did not answer any of them. I know the number because I counted them the following morning when I went through the log before blocking the relevant numbers. The voicemails, which I listened to in one sitting the next afternoon, with the specific preparation of a person who knows they are going to hear difficult things, and has decided to hear them all at once rather than in pieces, contained the following. My mother crying, saying she had done nothing wrong and that she had only been trying to help, and that I had humiliated her in front of the entire family, and she didn't understand what she had done to deserve a son like this. My father quieter, saying that what I had said about Martin would kill my mother, and I needed to think about whether I understood the consequences of what I had done. My sister, 3 separate messages, the tone of which escalated from concern to cold to something I can only describe as administrative. The final one essentially notifying me of what would happen next rather than asking anything. Arnold, 1 message, expressing that my behavior had been disrespectful and that he hoped I understood the impact on Janet's evening. Stefan, 2 messages. The first one was angry. The second one, which arrived about 40 minutes after the first, was more carefully worded and made reference to legal matters, which told me someone had suggested he phrase things differently. Rick, 1 message asking me to call him, just that. Call me. The specificity of that request, no context, no defense, no anger, was the most interesting response of the evening. Dan, 1 message. He said, "You're right." That's all he said, "You're right," and then he hung up. I am not going to tell you how I felt about Dan's message, because that one belongs to me. The calls transitioned to messages when I stopped answering calls. The messages transitioned to a WhatsApp family group I had been a passive member of for 3 years, in which a discussion began that I can only describe as a collaborative fiction project. A retelling of the evening's events in which I had experienced some kind of episode, in which the things I said were the product of stress and possibly illness, in which the family had been nothing but supportive and were simply worried about me. I was not tagged in this discussion. I was discussed in it. I read it for 2 days before muting the group. A cousin, not Daisy, a different cousin, called me to say that people were concerned. I said I was fine. The cousin said that perhaps I should talk to someone. I said I had been talking to people for 29 years and it hadn't produced great results, and I was going to try talking to fewer people for a while. My mother called from 3 different numbers over the course of the week. The first 2 I sent to voicemail. The third I answered because I thought it might be something medical. She said, "Liam, you've broken this family." I said, "Mom, I'm going to say something and I want you to hear it. I did not break anything that was not already broken. I described things that were already true. If the description caused damage, the things being true caused the damage, not the description." She said, "How could you say those things about Martin?" I said, "The same way he spent 20 years not saying them to anyone." She started crying. I said, "I'm not going to apologize for what I said. I am sorry that it hurt you. Those are different things and I need you to understand the difference." She said she didn't understand how I could be so cold. I said, "I have been the warm one for a very long time, Mom. I kept everyone's secrets. I absorbed everyone's versions of events. I came to every dinner and sat through every rotation, and I filed everything away because I thought that was what love looked like. I was wrong about what love looked like." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "What does love look like?" I said, "I'm still figuring that out, but I know it doesn't look like what happened at that table before I opened my mouth." We stayed on the phone for a moment without either of us speaking. She said, "Your grandfather loved this family." I said, "I know he did. I also know what else he did. Both of those things are true." She hung up. The WhatsApp group was not the limit of the response. I want to be clear about this because I think people assume that family conflict of this kind stays within family channels. It does not always stay within family channels. Harry posted something on Facebook. He did not name me directly. He posted a reflective observation about young people who mistake bitterness for honesty and anger for truth. The post received comments from people I do not know and from Catherine, and from a woman I identified, through the profile picture, as Mrs. Sharma, the person he had told about my mother at the Desai function. I screenshotted it. I sent the screenshot to my lawyer supervising partner with a note asking whether it was worth doing anything with. He said not yet, but to keep collecting. My sister came to my building. Not my apartment, she doesn't have my apartment number, only the building address. She rang the building intercom. I could see her on the camera feed. I did not buzz her in. She stood outside for 25 minutes. Then she left. I do not know what she intended to say, and I did not feel compelled to find out. Stefan's wife, Catherine, sent me a formal email. I say formal because it was written in a way that suggested someone else had helped compose it, or that she had spent time on it. It said that the comments I had made at the dinner regarding her employment history were defamatory, and she was considering her options. I forwarded it to my partner with the same note. Rick messaged me again. He said, "Can we get coffee, just us?" I said I'd think about it. I am still thinking about it. My father called once. Late at night, I answered. He said, "The documents about Martin. How long have you known?" I said 8 months. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I said, "I was protecting you." He said, "That's not your job." I said, "I know. I've been doing it anyway for a long time. I think it's probably the family habit." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He said, "Are you going to pursue it legally?" I said, "I don't know yet. I think you should get advice before I decide anything. Independently, not through the family." He said he'd think about it. He said, "Liam." I said, "Yes." He said, "The things you said about Dan and the loan, how did you know?" I said, "You told me. During COVID. You don't remember, but you did. You were very tired and you were worried, and I asked you directly what was wrong and you told me." He said, "I didn't mean to tell you that." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have handled it differently." I said, "Yes." Pause. He said, "I should have handled a lot of things differently." I said, "Yes." Neither of us said anything for a moment. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm getting there." He said, "Good night." I said, "Good night." We hung up. Dan came to find me, not my building. He doesn't know where I live. He went to my firm. He asked the receptionist for me by name. She told him I was with a client, which I was, and asked if he wanted to leave a message. He left his phone number, which I already had, and the words, "I want to talk. No pressure. I'll wait." When I finished with the client, I sat in my office for 10 minutes. Then I went down and found him in the lobby. He looked old. I don't know why this surprised me. I knew he was 68. But something about him in the lobby of my firm, sitting with his hands on his knees, looked very old. He stood up when he saw me. He said, "I'm not here to ask anything. I just wanted to say something." I said, "All right." He said, "Your father told me about the loan the week after he paid it off. He called me. I knew he'd paid it. I didn't contact him because I was ashamed, and shame is easier to manage at a distance than up close. I came back because Pam said enough time had passed. She was wrong about the time and I should have told her so." I said, "Why did you need the loan?" He said, Dino had some problems. I needed money quickly and I didn't want to explain to anyone why." I said, "My father had some problems during COVID too." He said, "I know." I said, "He didn't disappear." He said, "I know." We stood in the lobby. I said, "I don't know what you want me to say." He said, "I don't want you to say anything. I wanted to come in person because I couldn't say what I needed to say over the phone." I said, "What did you need to say?" He said, "I'm sorry. For the loan. For the 5 years. For coming back like it was nothing and eating at his table and not saying it to his face. I'm telling you because you're the one who said it out loud and someone should have said it to you a long time ago." I looked at him. He said, "You were a good kid. You've become a good man. You didn't deserve what that table did to you that night, or any of the nights before it." He shook my hand. He left. The estate matter is with my partner and a family solicitor I've instructed on my mother's behalf. I arranged this because, whatever my feelings about the family, my mother should not navigate a legal matter of this complexity without representation, and I was not going to let her use someone who didn't know what they were doing. My partner has communicated to the other side. The process will take time. I have not attended any family gathering. I have not responded to the WhatsApp group. I have not engaged with Harry's Facebook output. I have not opened the WhatsApp messages from Stefan that began arriving after the email, and that contain what I understand to be theological arguments about respect and family hierarchy. I have spoken to my father twice more. Short calls. Practical. We are finding a register for each other that we have not used before, which is the register of 2 adults who share a history and are figuring out what they want from each other going forward. I have not spoken to my mother since the phone call in week 1. I do not know when I will speak to her again. This is not a decision I have made with finality. It is a space I am leaving open because I am not certain what I want to put in it yet. About Rick, I'm still thinking about the coffee. My 2 clients paid their first invoices this week. Both on time, both without drama. It was the most satisfying professional moment I have had in several years. The question I keep coming back to, the one I'm actually asking Reddit about, is this. I don't regret what I said. I want to be clear about that. Every word was true. Every person I addressed had done the thing I described. The grandfather information was real and documented and was going to be disclosed eventually regardless. I chose the timing, but I did not manufacture the content. What I'm sitting with is the question of whether it was mine to say in that room on that evening in that way. My therapist, yes, I have a therapist, I've had one for 3 years, says that the question of whether it was mine to say and the question of whether it needed to be said are different questions. She says I compartmented them. She says I might be right about both answers and still need to look at whether the compartmentation served me or served the moment. I think she's right. I think I did compartment them. I think I chose the moment with the specific precision of someone who has been waiting for a justified moment for a long time and found one and used it. I think that's honest, and I think the honest version of it is not entirely comfortable. I'm sitting with that. I'm sleeping fine. I have 2 clients. It's something. Top comment in TA, but I want to specifically clock the grandfather reveal. You sat on that for 8 months, while going to family events, while being treated like the problem child. You could have dropped it at any point and you chose not to because you were protecting them. And then your mother broke a secret you specifically asked her to keep and told you honesty was all you had. She handed you the key to the room she didn't know you had. That's not a snap. That's a door that got opened from the wrong side. Comment 2, the way you went around the table one by one, with specific receipts, with dates, with quotes. That's not a person who lost control. That's a person who was extremely controlled and had been for a very long time. Op replied, that's probably the most accurate description of it I've read. Comment 3, Rick said you're right and just hung up. I genuinely don't know what to do with that. He's either the most self-aware person in this story or he's been waiting for someone to say it out loud for years. Comment 4, your mum said what does love look like and you said I'm still figuring that out. I need a moment. Comment 5, are you okay? Not in the aftermath sense, in the actual sense. You've managed a lot of things very logically in this post, and that's admirable, and also sometimes people manage things logically because the alternative is harder to look at. I'm asking genuinely. Op replied, that's the most useful question in this thread. I don't have a complete answer. I'll say, I'm better than I was. I'm not all the way somewhere yet. I have 2 clients and a therapist and a father I'm finding a new way to talk to. That's a working set. Still, thank you for asking, and the DMs too.